Recording.
Awesome. All right. Well, welcome to the first documentation clinic at SaltStack. And we're going to be really using this one to go over kind of a general overview of contributing to the docs, specifically with the focus on the SALT project on GitHub, rather than just because it can be a little bit different between a variety of our projects. But this one, most of the takeaways will be able to apply to our other projects. And so yeah, I'm just going to kind of jump into sharing my screen and walking through kind of, well, I suppose so what we're going to be doing first is going to be seeing that the easiest way to contribute, which is working with issues. And how would you submit an issue for documentation based off of either feedback, a suggestion, or correction that you see when looking at the SALT docs. And we have a new docs issue template thanks to Sage and company. And where that'll help with some simple prompts that we'll follow along with and kind of go from here's kind of the minimal baseline issue that would be of assistance to people who might want to take it on, and also kind of a more well-detailed way of creating an issue for people. And from there, we're going to move on to if you wanted to take on an existing issue or an issue that you've opened yourself, and what that PR process and contributing looks like. And there's a few different ways that it can unfold, and we'll walk through those differences. So first up is, let me get that screen shared here. Cool. All right. So here I'm sitting at SALT's repository in GitHub. And we're going to first actually go through on a docs page to find ourselves a problem. And so when looking at the docs, every documentation page has in the top left-hand corner a little edit on GitHub button. And that's going to be key to providing some information for us and to create some well-detailed issues on SALT. Now I'm looking at an execution module, and the execution modules, this one is one of the Kubernetes ones, because the other day I was looking through and I noticed that there was some formatting problems here with our examples. And you can see it says example of paths array, but it's completely empty. And right below it, there's some text. And it looks like that was probably meant to be inside of that bash box. And looking actually on the rest of the page, if wanting to see, is there maybe some other weird formatting problems that have happened? You could see something, pretty much what looks like someone, when they were in the midst of creating their functions for update and create secret in this Kubernetes execution module, that to make it easy, they wanted to copy and paste their examples. But the problem is it looks like they copy and pasted the incorrect formatting of the examples. So, hey, that looks weird, that looks strange, and we'd want to open an issue for this. And the easiest way to know where is the source code for this documentation, because all of the documentation that you see on this site here went underneath this documentation tab, and it's in this format with our SALT versions, master, etc. This is all located within the SALT repo on GitHub. And that's where this little button here, when clicking on it, will help us know where the source file is located. So this brings up two things. There can be more than one area that documentation can appear in. And I'm going to open, just for a quick comparison, the documentation one other documentation file. And so usually we have a layout where we'll see salt, doc, and then in that directory are a lot of RST files. And in our case here, if we're looking at some RST files have well-detailed information, be our installation guides for certain operating systems, or this one is providing some information on writing salt documentation, which, by the way, we will be updating. This video is to help kind of go with the freshest way that we will be looking at for guidelines. But here, this is something where you can edit the content if it is not based on something like an execution module, where we have a walkthrough on how to use particular commands. And so this is generally what you'll see in an RST file. And it becomes a lot easier to open an issue on something like this, or even to make edits, because it's pretty clear. You might see some misspelling or some incorrect formatting, and you'd want to do some RST. And so I actually, with that being the case too, I'm going to quick get some links here, because I should share. I'm wondering if we can get these shared on the Twitch stream. Oh, there it is. Yeah, got that opened up here.
I'll share them in Twitch chat once you have them. Can you put them in Zoom chat, please?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
So we're gonna want to use, let's use these links here. Kind of opening a lot of windows at once. Okay, so here's one walkthrough with using restructured text, because that's what RST stands for, is restructured text for formatting of our files. And there's also another cheat sheet that can be found in a GitHub repo that I'll put right there. So there's two links for RST formatting. And I believe there's let's see. This is also using Sphinx. So here's another link there. And a lot of these links we'll be able to provide with the video when it gets posted too. So with that being the case, what's up with this weird format here? We just saw all of everything for multiple module commands and their examples, and that's because Sphinx is smart enough to know that it can crawl through the Python code files and strip the doc strings out to then create formatted documentation in the salt docs. And that means updates then to that content, such as what we just saw with the examples, need to happen at the source file that's being referenced in the Python instead of just simply the RST file. So we did the edit on GitHub button, which brought us to this RST file. And this reference in the auto module is actually referencing the Python file itself. And so salt.modules.k8s. So that means I know I need to go into, and is this text, by the way, big enough for the screen right now for people who are watching? Or should I zoom in a little?
Looks good to me.
Okay, cool. So we said salt.modules, and then K8s. And that's then how you would find the actual source Python file for where this kind of thing is located. And we know that when we were looking at create secret and update secret had the problems in their doc strings. Which would be starting with that module. Now that's quite a lot of steps and might be a little complex. So we're going to just simply walk through the two different types of issues we can make in this case based on that information. So let's go to new issue. Our little new issue walkthrough has a configuration of multiple steps. Well, actually multiple options, I should say, where we can go for joining the SALT community Slack or different ways of getting a hold of people to ask questions. And we also have a docs issue. In this case, that's exactly the kind of thing we're going to be wanting to get started with. And we'll see that we have a few things: a description, suggested fix, type of doc, location or format of the documentation, and any added notes. So, all right. Well, we have the link right here. That this is the docs representation of it. That's kind of like a minimal necessity. Which pages have the problems? What's even more helpful too is using the header anchors. And so I know that create secret on that page specifically has the problem, and we'll see a little link to this location at the end of that line. And so clicking on that, we'll modify link. And so we'll see a little bit, we'll see the little mark, the little anchor reference at the end. And we also know that update secret had the same problem. And so this is, and I'm going as detailed as possible too, because often when I'm opening issues, I do it for my own sanity to be as detailed as possible. If I'm working on a lot of things, if I get pulled away, or if I want this to be as helpful for someone to know where they need to go to fix something. And it's also helpful for the SALT team when they're triaging to know what exactly is the problem and a better understanding without having to ask several follow-up questions. So we got the docs here. We know that it's an example problem. So with the rendering of that format, it's coming out really weird. Or maybe when you see something, you're not quite sure why it's appearing that way on the page. So example for some of the commands in the Kate's execution module are empty or formatted incorrectly. Suggested fix. Well, we want to fix them. Fix the formatting.
Make it look pretty.
Yeah. Make it look really nice. Okay. So type of documentation. We do have several different types of documentation. I just showed the two different, I showed that, hey, we're in a Python file here. We're in kind of just a SALT doc that's not dependent on a Python code file. But also when we're looking at the page, there are different tabs that might sit outside the world of these docs, because if you go to our main overview page, for example, we have things like our getting started guide, and that sits inside of a completely different repository. And so it might be hard to know that that's a fact because, for one, it doesn't really explain that here, right? And so that could either be mentioned in this issue, or I could also probably provide a link to the getting started repo. Might be helpful too. So now in our case, it's totally in SALT modules because this is a Python file that we're pulling this out of in this case. And it's a lot easier in here because this is just one file. Now, that's cool, but I could actually get more detailed because because GitHub actually provides previews of code snippets that you could have directly within the window. Because one thing I haven't provided yet was a direct link to the source file. And sometimes someone might not know where that is. So, I mean, even this right here, this is pretty much a good minimal baseline. There could be some more information on which examples maybe but I'm going to show you a really cool feature of GitHub where they allow you to link directly to areas where a problem exists or code block. Now, in our case, since this is stripping from a doc string, create secret being one of the functions that had the problem, this is the code block. These are the code blocks that we saw on the site. And for those familiar with restructured text, the problem is an indentation issue. Usually if you use something like a code block, which is, this is called a directive in restructured text, a code block directive. You have the code block, you have the name of what type of code is going to be in that block, and then you have to indent anything that's supposed to be caught by that directive. So if we look above, here's one of the working examples, and it's all indented. So when we go back and look here, let's go to create secrets. That which was indented is properly in the code block. And so that's actually we know what the problem is here, but because sometimes it can be hard, especially for people who aren't familiar with restructured text, that's why we're kind of going through every step of making this a more detailed issue from someone who might spot the problem and want people to be aware to then really walking through how it would be resolved and figured out. So what was I saying about GitHub, right? Is that you can click on the number of the line where it begins, the problem begins. And if you hold shift and click on a second number where that ends, this little, I don't know, radial dial, I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but it has a little menu that allows you to copy a permalink.
Ellipses.
I decided it should be called the line selector. That's what it can
The
be.
line selector, the ellipses line selector. I
The
love it.
ellipses line selector. Okay, yes,
There you
let's go with
go.
that. So our ellipses line selector. Yes. We're going to get that copy permalink here. We're going to go back to our issue, and I'm just going to copy paste that in. Now, what's super cool about that, it's not just a link, but when it gets rendered into Markdown, it gets rendered into the code block preview embedded directly in the issue, which is really awesome because it means anyone who's going to go back and look at that issue for yourself or others, they don't have to navigate to hunt down the file and hunt down the area where that code exists. It's all at a glance, makes triage easier, just makes issues better in general. So that was the first one, and that has to do with create secret, but we had two. So I'm just going to put a little thing here going create secret and that one, and we have the second, which is update secret. And let's go find, oops, drag that one out. Update secret. And we have the same block here. I kind of accidentally dragged that one out, but we're done with that. Cool. So now we have both code blocks and the different the different line numbers there. So that's good. We of course need a title. So, hey, what's our problem? And actually I kind of did technically skip a step here, which was when you first notice an issue, it's really good to search for whether someone else found that problem. So if you were to say, okay, I know it's K8S, where does that appear in issues? You might see a handful. Are they mentioning documentation problems? Remove to code string, something about a Raspberry Pi, Salt SSH problems, module node management. No, it's a bunch of other stuff.
They will also in GitHub, if you go back to your new issue.
Yeah.
and you scroll down, it'll,
Probably if I start typing out an issue title.
if you start typing it out, and you'll probably have to do, you know, Kubernetes spelled out too.
Right.
It'll kind of give you some, in this GUI, it kind of checks for some things too and say, have you checked? It's not obvious, but it is there. And sometimes I will grab, like if I've got these URLs that are getting to like modules, salt modules, Kubernetes, HTML or whatever, I'll even search for that in issues. You can do a string and then do in : body to try to look for that. But I don't spend a ton of time on it because sometimes they're, even if I've got similar modules, they're usually pretty different. So we try to catch those in triage too.
Cool. Yes, I mean, that's what there is to seeing an issue in the docs, to opening an issue about the problem, to finding out how to navigate the source code of the different types of documentation that the salt docs are generated from. And we'll see that this is actually going to get a label automatically of documentation on it, which is nice. All right, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and submit this issue. Bam. In this case, I'm totally going to be working on this, so I'm going to assign myself since I can. And I'm even going to be like, I got this. Cool. All right. That's really part one. That's the easiest way to contribute is either opening a new issue, or if you find that other people have noticed the problem and had opened an issue about it, and you find it in your search, so you don't have to necessarily open your own, go and comment in there. Or a very common way to do this is in GitHub is on the first top message is give that a thumbs up to say, hey, I'm another user who saw this and totally agrees that this is an issue that needs to be resolved. And so often you'll see a message and with 6 thumbs up or something because other people have found it and it annoyed them. So that's first step. And we're now going to go into the deeper in the weeds on what the world looks like when you are contributing to the SALT project by bringing the code down to your own developer environment, being your own workstation or whatever choice, path of choice that you got that. Here I'm going to just start with SALT. And actually, before I move on, are there any questions or extra comments about that issue stuff? And if there's maybe other links we should provide as resources for people? Maybe not.
I don't think so. Seems pretty straightforward to me.
Did I move too fast? Was that detailed enough? I feel like, you know, taking this tour, taking people for a tour
I
through
thought it was good. So
the Salt Stack Fairgrounds. Yeah, okay.
I liked it.
Awesome. Okay, then. Let's get right to what it looks like in the land of Git and going directly into files to make our edits. So if you're looking at SALT, we use a fork branch submission system. That's just the common way of contributing to open source. And so you go to fork. I already have one. You'd click your own user space. It may automatically just bring it straight to where you need it to be. And from here, you would use HTTPS or SSH, or I forgot with GitHub CLI's now recent version 1.0 release, they've added a third option for cloning. My case, I already have it locally on my system. You do need to follow some other prereqs, which I'm not going to go over, but I am going to provide, let me get some links for those. You need to have Git installed. you need to have a Python 3 installed and available on your system. And you also need to have a GPG key configured. So I'm going to copy GPG key docs for GitHub, put that into Zoom, and I could copy paste that into Twitch probably here too. Okay. And then I should also, oh, you already got the RST ones in there. Cool. And so this is assuming that that stuff's already set up. Along with how I was at the contributor guide earlier, we have a base quick start. This is kind of, contributor guide is going through some transformation at the moment, and it will be kind of an ever evolving thing. But there's a little quick start in there that does talk about, hey, here's a way to maybe set up pre-commit where you can do it in the user space, because pre-commit is what we're going to need, where it will automatically scan our change for any changes that we may need to do before submitting, because it'll be caught otherwise directly with some errors. And I'm going to walk through what that actually looks like, what that output looks like. All right. So how does this terminal text looks like it's okay on Twitch based on what I'm seeing. So first size. And I'm using a little bash modifier that just tells me what branch I'm on. Now what you're going to want to do, this is my fork that I cloned down. I know of a change I want to make. And so I'm going to be creating a new branch here, which will be Kate's doc fix. And what I did to get my pre-commit set up, and for another tool that we're going to have set up with being Knox, is I use a tool in my environment. I use Prereqs. Prereqs just ensures that if I have like, if I want tools to be available across multiple projects, but I also don't want their dependencies to kind of conflict with each other, Prereqs will install it in a space that's almost like an isolated virtual environment. Other ways of installing this that you'll see from our docs too will be like pip install user and then the package, so that it's restricted to the user space. So in my case, I had pre-commit done here. I'll probably, I get this little error because I already have it installed. So Prereqs output would look like this. I'm on an Ubuntu based, I'm on a Pop OS created by System 76, so Debian based, but really Pop OS starts off of Ubuntu. And Prereqs is available through apt. And so Prereqs install pre-commit and Knox. This is kind of what the output would look like. And so I'm not going into too much detail on this portion, just because there are some different ways of doing it. This seems to be the best way for me, and our docs do talk about using it in the user space. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, you also need to, one thing that's in the docs is that you do need to do pre-commit install. And that's just going to mean that it's going to run the tests against our change when we're ready. Okay, so that's a quick crash course on getting ourselves ready to make a change, including those links to what modification you need to get set up with your fork, with your cloned fork locally. I'm going to use Vim to make our edit. And if we remember where our issue was, it was in salt modules K8S Pi. And we know that the problem involved, what did we have? It involved like some examples that are probably specific to it. So this will just make it easy for me to search for where this problem exists.
And Derek, I'll just add that you're opening it in Vim because it's nice and easy in the terminal to see, but anybody could use whatever their preferred editor is to do any of these kinds of changes to the docs. So,
Yeah, like this could be opened up in Visual Studio Code just fine too. And or whatever editor of choice. I'm just using Vim because then I'm not bouncing around too much, and I'm not kind of playing around with the zoom in, zoom out. And I'm only making a minor text change. So this doesn't have to require too much extra fluff. So here.
oh, you
go ahead.
also showed the line numbers previously. Could you demonstrate how to show line numbers in Vim? Just
Yeah,
it helps a little bit.
Set number.
There you go.
Yeah. And so you can then see the exact line numbers that, just like what were referenced in the GitHub issue when I had those little code snippets. And this will, and this is generally by default visible in an editor of choice too. So we're gonna just want to indent these properly. And it's gonna be, I mean, if it's in your VS Code editor, for example, you probably have spaces tied to your indent for these files. And so it's like whatever can make that as easy as possible. We know that this is in 2 separate places. This is the first one. And so I want to make sure that I actually go to the other place, which was example of paths array. Here's the other one. Oops, there we go. And cool. That's really what it might look like. And I'm using WQ exclamation point to get out. It looks like that could be the only thing needed, but there's some complexities with using pre-commit and all the tests that get run. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to do my commit, but see, before I had already done a pre-commit install. So pre-commit is configured for this repo, and we're gonna see this in action now. So when I get ready to contribute my commit, I see that we have some indentations. That's exactly what I was doing. Indentations, that was exactly what I was doing. But now pre-commit's running. This is where all this output's coming out. And I'm gonna walk through what these all mean. The reason you see a lot of skips, pre-commit only cares based on the files that are being modified. It's not gonna just simply run against the entire repo when you do your change. So a lot of these were like, oh, I don't need to do this check based on what this change is doing. This we're gonna see in a moment. Because we're dropping Python 2 support, files will automatically be modified if they have yet to drop 6 and the formatting that's associated with making sure that it's backward compatible. And you'll see that there's a line that actually says files were modified by this hook. So whenever you see files were modified by this hook, pre-commit is not only checking for whether it passes a test, it may actually make the changes it believes it just needs to automatically pass that test. And so in our case, we're also doing black for our code formatter. Black is an opinionated code formatter so that we don't have to try to apply manual standards of some form. It's just automatically going to ensure that whatever changes you're making to Python files are getting those. Oh, it looks like Cassandra was kicked out of Zoom.
That's odd.
So
We should be good to still continue, right?
yeah, we should be good.
Okay.
I'll see if she can rejoin. Because I see Twitch is still working as expected there. Okay. Yeah, and so you'll see this little, Black likes to show you some cake, by the way, whenever it formats your code. So that's nice, shiny cake. And then it runs this linter. So this linter is will provide probably some errors for some people. I have some strange ones, and we're going to go over that. We're hoping to make this an easier thing over time by modifying a lot of these files so that unrelated, because these are completely unrelated to what we just did, right? All we did was change some indentation of a code example. And but we're getting a handful of errors around that. Here, it's saying there's a file permissions problem, I guess. And here we're also seeing that there's an unused 6 import, which kind of means that that change that was supposed to automatically update the file to just be pure Python 3 has left some kind of artifact that we'd have to change. It at least gives us the line number, line 25. So I got to do 2 steps apparently. One is fix the permissions that it's expecting to be 644 of the file, and then remove this import. So
That's funny. It gives a code rating. I just now noticed that. You wrote some good code, it says.
oh yeah, you know me. I just this documentation is on fire. So
Funny.
we're gonna do salt modules. Sorry that my prompt's like blocked by a Zoom bar, and so I'm like looking at Twitch to make sure that this is coming out right. Okay. Okay, and then what? Oh, that 6 import on line 25. So I'm just going to go right back to the file, and we got imports, and I mean, if we had that number showing right, it was line 25. So salt ext, we don't need this one. You'll see that there's a different 6 import going on here where it's importing something as underscore URL parse. And like, why wasn't that flagged? And that's because URL parse is actually being called later on in the code. All right. Now, if I ran that, is this actually going to work now? And I could try git commit. Now, what this is going to look like is a totally different file commit. And you'll see, hey, it's removing some file encoding information and these other like future and 6 imports, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of stuff that this is actually what a combination of dropping the Pi2 and 6 support and also applying black formatting. It's a combination of it. So it actually makes these PRs at the moment a little bit messier. And so this is why opening an issue for docs at times can seem a lot easier, a lot less complex. I think initially when this change was being done, there was concern about a gigantic PR modifying every single file. And so people felt more comfortable with changing the files as they were modified over time. But then this kind of, it spreads the complexity out. You know, I don't know if in the future we might be doing just several small PRs that are updating each file one at a time in order to make it so that small contributions like what I was making to the doc strings don't result in large file changes like this is. But there's a lot more conversation going on around that. So here's pre-commit running again. If you notice, last time I ran that git commit and pre-commit ran, I never made it to this screen, which this is opening it in a default editor that I set with Git to actually put my Git commit message. And that's why it's called pre-commit, is pre-commit kind of intervenes. When you're ready to commit, it goes, are you ready to commit? And it will run through to see whether it's okay with you going forward. In this case, since I made it here, I've passed the pre-commit tests. and updating Kubernetes example code or example,
Formatting, maybe?
yeah, formatting, and I'll put more information too inside of the PR that's referencing the pre-commit changes too. And that's it. Now I could actually push it to my fork.
So you didn't do a preview to ensure that your changes worked?
That's a very good point.
I don't know that it matters when you, like if you do it, I generally do it before I do a commit, but not a problem to do it at this stage either. So
No, that would actually be best practice is have it generate to look at the site output. And we have recently made some changes with the help of Pedro on how to make it really easy to look actually at what the documentation page output looks like. And so we have a Knox command. And let me get that, because right now it's new enough and fresh enough. It hasn't yet been put into our docs, which is part of why we're doing this docs clinic, is to add some of these, mention these new features. And let's see.
I just dropped the command in the chat if that helps.
Oh yeah, that'll be nice. Probably put that into the Twitch too. So earlier I installed Knox with Pitbacks, and Knox will actually set up a temporary virtual environment, and it will run commands based on an argument you're giving it. We specifically have one that's dedicated to docs HTML output, and this is the best way to do it because it will check what version of Python that Knox is installed with that you have locally, and will generate, it'll get all the proper version of Sphinx that we have tied to that Python version. And you can see it's pulling that requirement. This is within the SALT repository, the requirements file for Python 3.8. Python 3.8 is what I have on here. And this is the virtual environment location locally in the repo. But this will take some time. And the reason it takes some time is it's going through, well, I mean, you could see here, hey, it's finding like a lot of files. And it's going to be going through all of the Python code for the doc strings that it needs to pull out that are referenced in RST files. And it's also going to compile together the RST files into HTML. So now it's kind of it's a little bit of a waiting thing at this point. Actually, Lisa, did you want to speak to Docs Working Group and the Docs Jam too?
Yeah, sure. So while we're waiting for this to compile, because it will take a moment, figured we could mention a few upcoming events related to documentation. The first thing that we probably want to mention is tomorrow is another one of our Docs Working Group sessions, and I have created our agenda for us. I'm dropping it in the Zoom link. Could you also, Derek, add it to the Twitch stream? And then maybe you could even bring it up.
Sure, yeah. The Docs Hub, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just that's our meeting agenda for tomorrow if you would like to join us. That's at noon Mountain Time. And we would love to have more community members join us for that. So if you want to talk about the docs or put an issue on our radar, you're welcome to attend our working group. We would welcome anyone who's a friend of the docs. There we go. Yep. So that's our agenda so far. We usually just post it here on the doc sub repo. And the big event that is coming up, as you'll see on that agenda, another date of note is we are doing a documentation jam next Wednesday, a week from today, from 8 to 5 Mountain. We're going to basically be working on documentation issues, and we would love anybody to join us. We're going to have 3 different tracks, and a lot of those 3 tracks involve doing what Derek's been doing in the docs clinic today. Opening issues against docs that you think need some help. That's very helpful to us to just be aware of where the documentation needs to change. You can work on getting your environment set up. We'll have people available here to help you walk through what Derek has been doing today. If you would like to start contributing to the docs. But one of the number one things that you can do to help us is to provide us with more examples of how you are using the modules in your day-to-day work. So we would love it if you could help us write a few examples of, this is how I use this module, this is how I use this module, and open that in a ticket. That would be so phenomenal. If you want to come and join us, help us with that, because our community is the one that really knows how to use SALT, and we would love to be able to get some of that information from the community and improve our docs, because that's the number one request we get from people is we need more examples of how to use the modules in the docs. So that's my 2 plugs for what's coming up with the docs. You want to add anything, Derek?
I don't know. I'd like that you made sure to mention that need for examples. Like if people are able to open a new issue and there's a docs issue related to SALT documentation, right in here is something where people could simply go, hey, there need to be more examples in this execution module, or more examples in this state module. And if being able to either provide one, like if someone has, especially if people have experience with them, because one thing that probably happens for a lot of SALT users is that they'll go research and look up some execution module stuff or state modules and kind of have to experiment and play around with it to understand how it works. And maybe they didn't like that there weren't enough examples or detailed examples about how something worked. And these are the exact people who can really provide the best input for us. Because I think we have something like, I don't know, I don't know if Sage, you could speak to it, how many actual execution modules and state modules we have. We just have a ton. I don't know if it's...
We have 525. It's a lot.
So there's a lot of code and a lot of documentation going on and a lot of different use cases. And so then for when people have had experience with these modules and have then examples that they could contribute, even just putting them into an issue here, like here's an example, here are some examples. If they're not doing a PR themselves, we could take the work to then discuss more in the issue, update PRs, to have those examples included. It's going to be an ongoing thing. And I think part of the Docs Jam is really to will be to mine people's minds for these things that we can get, then we could work toward improving the documentation with. Oh, and looks like actually our HTML output's built. So that's cool. So then how do we, let's use, I'll use Firefox to just kind of open up the docs. Where the docs get generated locally is in doc_build. And inside of there is an HTML directory, and the home page for this documentation is the contents file. And so this is the easiest way to start previewing. Since this didn't result in any errors, that's a good sign. And I could actually open this up. See, this looks just like what we see on the site generally. And now But if you have a particular file, mine's a Kubernetes, the K8 as execution module. So I'm just going to navigate it like I would the docs normally. And if I'm going to look at create secret, we can see that it's actually within here. But we also see that the output's a little bit. This does need to be reviewed because this isn't actually bash either. So that this starts to become a little bit of a deeper problem. I was talking to Wayne yesterday, asking like, is this? It looks like it's Python, like it's meant to be Python. And so I'm thinking I'll change the code formatters here, and also fix the fact that, hey, this thing has a string around it. I mean, this is supposed to be a string, but they're all using different string formats. I want to make it less ugly. So, but we know that it's actually properly appearing in the code blocks. So that's a good first step. In both cases, it's not just that empty code block. And I'll actually, did I put a link to, no, I didn't. I'll put a link to where it's actually broken for people to see in the chat. That's in Twitch, but I'll also get it here in Zoom. Okay. But as Elisa pointed out, you'd probably want to do that before you run your git commit. It's a lot better to actually verify it. So then you're not going to have a pile of commits that, later you might be asked to squash. And it gets messy if you have to start merging, if you're having to update from master and then still try to figure that out. So from there is when you'd be able to open a PR. And I'll probably open mine as a work in progress just because I see some other problems there. But usually in your Git output, there's actually a line that says open a new PR based on this. But GitHub is generally, if I go back to my fork, I've been probably creating a little bit. Oh, actually, I never pushed it, so that's probably why.
Yeah, I derailed you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. There's a lot of stuff going on. So when the branch doesn't exist on your fork, you'll get the prompt to say, hey, I don't see it there at the moment. So you need to run this command to get that set up. And once you actually have that placed in, that's where you'll get a little pop-up. That's kind of like a quick button to create your pull request. And let me get that in here. All right. Here, there are some special code words that can be used in GitHub too. If you're working on something, you could either use draft or WIP, work in progress, as a prefix. And that'll actually help make it so that people aren't going to be reviewing it. It's not ready yet for review. And I actually have a link to this other bit here. GitHub has keywords, fixes, closes, resolves, etc. for issues, so that when a PR gets closed, if it is supposed to actually close out a different issue, this links them together so that it will be closed. And you can see on the right-hand side, hey, using closing keywords in the description automatically closes these. That's pretty cool. And so I'll just copy that link too and put that into chat. Closing keywords. And I'll put that into Twitch too. Cool. We opened a new issue, and it was the very latest and greatest. Is it going to pop up or no? No. Because I did submit that issue, right? So. Yeah. I'm 58593. Yeah. Cool. You get the little link preview then, that's what's going to appear inside of the PR when it's live. And so what does this do? This actually does a few things. It doesn't just fix our problem with the example code, but that's one of them. Fixes the indentation of some improperly formatted RST within doc strings. But then what else does it do? Updated its execution module file with pre-commit updates based on Python 2 deprecation and black format. Which is why this changes actually looks so much bigger than my minor change, as you can see down here. All the changes. All right. Previous behavior, docs formatting, output doesn't look right here. Doesn't look right. Reference the issue, this result. I don't need to really do a new behavior, honestly. The ticket that's closing is enough. In my case, I had GPG set up, which I provided a link for earlier. Yeah, I could remove these. These are just links on our contributing guide and the GPG signing. And, well, I guess this is a docs thing. But really, that's it for the most part. I always do allow edit by maintainers. Because if there's a minor fix that they can make, so they're not waiting on me. And actually, I wonder if I need to do draft, because I'm used to using WIP inside of GitLab. Does work in progress work the same way inside here? I'll probably do draft, because that might be a good idea. All right.
Looks good.
I guess I thought that the draft changed this little open button to be something else, but maybe I'm not doing it right. But all right. I guess, is there any questions on that? That's the long way that's the longest, like probably one of the longest paths that a docs contribution will be, which is why I selected this one. It'll range based on if the file's already been updated in the past for Python 2 deprecation and it's been properly formatted, and if it's just an RST file that is not including doc strings, it's not gonna, pre-commit isn't gonna go through all those hoops that I just went through, and it's gonna be much smaller of a change. And which if this looks like quite a lot to want to try to figure out and do, having a well-detailed issue is just a good place to start, whether you'd be contributing or someone else could take on and contributing for fixing the documentation or improving them.
Well, that was awesome. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, no problem. Are there other questions? I think I see, is it Nick from a community member might be here, and but if there's any questions from other people, Sage or Lisa too, or things you want to mention about the docs and contributing or the docs jam, we could dive right into it.
I can't think of anything for me.
Yeah, me either.
That was really great. Thank you so much, Derek.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And did Cassandra, wait, I can't actually see.
She had an internet outage. That's why she got dropped from the call.
Okay.
I'm
Cool.
glad I'm not the only one who has internet pains. My internet goes down a lot.
Yeah, and I'll also like to post all of these links into the documentation channel in Slack, because that's the other place where people can talk about documentation and get feedback directly from the docs team, is mentioning stuff inside of the documentation channel on our community Slack.
Oh yeah, good plug for that.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we should this recording, I believe we're going to be putting on YouTube too, with all the resource links needed for it. And we're going to be using it as a reference for improving the contributing guide based on a lot of these updates that have been happening to the process of contributing. Not just to documentation, but to the SALT project. And this video then kind of helped to have something exist for reference before the docs jam if someone wanted to see it. Granted, it's pretty long, because the longest path that I just shown can be pretty long, and there could be other things you could run into as problems. But if you ever run into problems when contributing to docs, then the documentation is great in Slack. But if you also have problems running into contributing in general to SALT, please reference the SALT community Slack to ask questions and to state that, because people could help you out and answer questions.
And that's why like opening issues is one of the best ways to help with the docs, because even if you don't want to go through this process, which I understand if you don't, but you want to suggest a change to the content, and you just want to write up that content and put it in an issue and have somebody else implement it later, that's totally doable.
But yeah, so I guess at this point, it's really for those who are present, if they do want to ask any questions about docs in general, and not just even specific to this little walkthrough. I was kind of I was showing off, and since I'd like to in the future do docs clinics where we are just fixing problems in docs, or if someone has certain feedback that maybe we need to get into an issue, or just talk about, that would be cool, because the docs really could use a lot of love and being either led by issues that are created, discussions within issues, direct PR contributions, discussions in the docs working group, which our next one is tomorrow, and especially the docs jam next week too. And did we actually, we did put a link to that docs hub repo, which we have like a agenda set up in there. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, if there isn't much else, if people don't have any questions, kind of think that this is a wrap, really.
Nice work, Derek.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Wait, hold on. I got a comment from Cassandra. I just want to check on that. Yeah, she's just checking to make sure we've been able to run okay.
All right. Well, I
Okay.
guess if we're done, we'll head out.
Awesome.
Okay.
And then thank you to everyone who's also helped me with the Docs Clinic dry runs in preparation for this, to just make sure what's the current process based on a lot of the testing changes that have been done, and what's the best way get the issue template, so we just have a simple, easy button to open a Docs issue. Thanks, Sage, and Annalisa, for your feedback too on that template. And actually, I think Ashley, you might have created the base template that Sage used. So it's all good teamwork here. So
Cool. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
all right, everybody, have a good Wednesday, and see you at the Docs Working Group if you're there.
All right, see you.